For Eira, he was a gift from the storm, a man without a name, without a memory, whose only past was a love they built with each new sunrise. She found him broken, and she fixed him. She found him lost, and she gave him a home. She called him Thunder, and he called her his life. For a year, their love was the only truth in a world of silence. But the sea always comes to collect its debts. The world did not know him as Thunder. The world knew him by a name whispered in fear, a name written in blood, the Executioner. The man she loved did not exist. And the monster he truly was coming home. The village of Mistport was a place cartographers forgot on purpose. A cluster of stone houses and thatched roofs, nestled in a cove that looked like a sigh against a jagged coast. Life that was ruled by two gods, the generosity and the fury of the sea. Eira, the village healer, understood that duality better than anyone. The sea gave her the algae for her salves, the fish for her soup. And years before, the sea had taken her parents, leaving her with a loneliness as vast as the ocean itself. She lived in a small cottage at the edge of the forest, a little removed from the fisherman's noise. Her companions were her jars of herbs, her botany books, and the constant murmur of waves. She wasn't unhappy. There was peace in her solitude, order in her routine, but it was a life in shades of gray, an existence of quiet survival, not of vibrant joy. She didn't know that the sea, the thief of her happiness, was about to give her a gift. The storm that brought him was a creature of legendary fury. For 2 days, the sky and the sea became an indistinguishable blur of gray and violence. When it finally broke, the morning sun revealed a beach littered with wreckage, the bones of a ship that had defied the gods and lost. And among the shattered wood and seaweed, there was a body. Eira had gone down to the beach in search of rare sea herbs that appeared only after great tempests. She saw him first. At first, she thought he was dead, face down, half submerged in the freezing surf, his clothes in tatters. But when a wave receded, she saw the faint movement of his shoulders. He was alive. Dragging him from the water was a trial. He was a large man, his body a map of muscle and old scars. With strength born of desperation and her healer's oath, she pulled him to the safety of dry sand. He was horribly wounded. A deep gash on his head bled profusely, and his body was covered in bruises. But the strangest thing was his face. Even beneath the dirt and blood, there was nobility in his features, strength in his jaw, but his eyes, when they opened briefly, were completely empty. They were like the sky after a storm, clear, vast, and devoid of memory. With the help of 2 old fishermen, she carried him to her cottage. For a week, he hovered between life and death. She cleaned his wounds, stitched a cut on his head, and fed him herbal broths. She watched him for hours, fascinated by the mystery of that man. The scars on his body told stories of brutal battles, but his hands, now at rest, seemed gentle. There was nothing on him, no mark, no ring, no document to tell who he was. He was a blank page. When he finally woke, the emptiness in his eyes remained. He didn't know his name. He didn't know where he came from. He remembered flashes, lightning, the sound of wood breaking, the taste of salt and blood. Nothing more. For him, the world began at that moment, in that small cottage, with Eira's face floating above him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm Eira," she replied softly. "And you're safe now." She needed to call him something. On the first night he was conscious, another storm passed over the coast. Smaller, gentler. When thunder rumbled in the distance, he flinched. "What was that?" he asked, the confusion of a child in his eyes. "It's just thunder," she soothed him. He seemed to like the word, repeating it slowly. Thunder. In that moment, she decided that would be his name, a name for the man the storm had brought her. The months that followed were a rediscovery. Eira taught Thunder how to live again. He had the instincts of a warrior, a fluid grace in his movements that betrayed him, but his mind was that of a learner. She taught him the names of herbs, the stories of the constellations, the songs the fishermen sang. He absorbed everything with hungry curiosity, his once empty eyes filling with wonder, with knowledge, and above all, with a deep, unwavering love for her. He became her shadow, her protector. The villagers, wary at first, were soon won over by his kindness. He used his strength to help pull the fishing boats ashore, to mend broken roofs, always with an easy smile and a gaze that rarely strayed far from Eira. He was a gentle giant, a man whose power seemed to exist only to serve and protect. Eira, for the first time in her life, was no longer alone. Her life, once painted in gray, burst into color. Their love was the most natural thing in the world, born not of words, but of actions. The way he brought her the rarest flower from the forest. The way she soothed him from nightmares of fire and screams he could never explain upon waking. He was haunted by a past he couldn't remember, and she was his only peace. One afternoon, as they walked along the beach where she had found him, he stopped. He took her hands, his face solemn, his eyes clear and filled with absolute certainty. "Eira," he said, voice trembling with emotion, "I don't know who I was before you, and I don't care. My past is darkness, but you are my sun. My life began the day you found me. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my days proving that I'm worthy of the man you saved." Tears streamed down Eira's face as she said yes. Their love was perfect. It was real. It was everything. They planned a small ceremony for the end of summer. They would build a life together there, in that little forgotten corner of paradise. It was an idyll, a dream made real. But dreams are fragile things, and the sea, the god that gives and takes, was not done with them yet. For a league off the coast, sailing beneath a banner of crossbones and scowl, was the Reaper. Its crew, loyal unto death, had spent a year scouring every island, every cove, following every rumor, every whisper. They were not searching for a man. They were searching for their king, and they were finally coming home. The happiness of Eira and Thunder was a castle of sand, and the tide, a tide of blood and memory, was about to come in. The last vestiges of Thunder died in that moment. The softness in his eyes hardened into chips of ice. The love was buried under an avalanche of pure, cold hate. The king had made his choice. He dropped his hand and turned his back on her, facing his first mate. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer the warm baritone Eira knew. It was a cold, sharp blade of a voice. The voice of a commander. "Make the ship ready, Grim," Captain Roric ordered. "We sail at dawn." Eira watched, her world collapsing into dust around her. The man she was going to marry, the man whose every touch had felt like a promise, had vanished. In his place stood a stranger, a terrifying, powerful king. He walked away from her, towards his men, towards his ship, towards his life of blood and vengeance, without a single backward glance. The storm had given him to her, and now the calm had taken him away, and she was alone again on the beach, her heart as broken and as empty as the shipwreck that had brought him to her shore. The man who walked away from Eira on that beach was not the man who had woken up in her cottage. Thunder had been a river, gentle and life-giving. Roric was a tidal wave, pulling everything back into the cold, violent embrace of the sea. As he strode towards his men, his entire being seemed to shift. His posture straightened from relaxed strength into the rigid, arrogant bearing of a commander. The easy smile was gone, replaced by a grim, unreadable mask. He was a king reclaiming his skin, and it was a painful, bloody process. Grim and the other pirates fell into step behind him. A loyal pack of wolves were forming around their alpha. They marched not to the longboat, but into the village. Eira watched in horror, a new kind of fear taking root in her heart. This wasn't just a departure. It was an invasion. The pirates moved through Port Mist with practiced, predatory efficiency. They were no longer an honor guard. They were an occupying force. Roric walked directly to the village tavern, the largest building, and kicked the door off its hinges. He strode to the center of the room, the terrified villagers scrambling to get out his way. He was no longer their friendly giant. He was their conqueror. "This village," he announced, his voice echoing in the stunned silence, "now belongs to me. It will serve as the forward operating base for my fleet until my business in these waters is concluded. Your boats, your food, your homes, they are mine. You will work for me. Any dissent," he paused, his icy gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had shown him nothing but kindness, "will be met with extreme prejudice. Am I understood?" No one dared to speak. The transformation was too absolute, too terrifying. Old Silas, the fisherman who had taught Thunder how to mend nets, took a hesitant step forward. "Son," he began, his voice trembling. "What is this?" "We're your friends." Roric turned his head slowly, his eyes fixing on the old man. There was no recognition in them, no memory of the quiet afternoon spent on the beach. "I am not your son," he said, his voice lethally soft. "And you are not my friends. You are my subjects, and you will learn your place." He nodded to Grim, who backhanded the old man across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. A gasp went through the crowd. Eira, who had followed them, felt the last of her hope shatter. The man she loved was truly gone. This creature wearing his face was a monster. Over the next few hours, the Reaper became the center of a brutal occupation. More pirates came ashore, turning the peaceful village into an armed camp. They took the best houses to themselves, ransacked the food stores, and claimed the fishing boats as their own. The life Eira and the villagers had known was systematically dismantled. She was now a prisoner in her own home, just like everyone else. But her prison was the most agonizing of all, because the king of this new, terrifying reality had not forgotten her. As dusk fell, Grim and two other pirates appeared at the door of her cottage. "The captain wants to see you," Grim grunted, his voice holding a new, mocking tone. She was escorted to the tavern, which had been converted into Roric's throne room. He sat in the center of it all, a flagon of ale in his hand, his men feasting and laughing around him. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable. He looked at her, the woman he had sworn to love for eternity, just that morning, with the detached curiosity of a man examining a strange insect. "Eira the healer," he said, his voice slurring slightly from the ale, "the woman who found a broken toy and tried to fix it." He gestured to a stool near the fire, far from him. "Sit. You are my guest." It was a cruel parody of their life together. He was forcing her to witness his transformation, to see the monster she had unleashed. She sat, her back straight, her hands clenched in her lap, refusing to show him her fear or her pain. "I need something from you, healer," he continued, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "My memory, it is not whole. There's a year-long gap, a fog. You were there. You will fill in the blanks for me." And so began a new form of torture. For hours, he forced her to recount their life together. He made her describe how she found him, how she named him, how he learned to smile again. He listened with a cold, analytical detachment, as if studying the tactics of an enemy. He was not remembering. He was gathering intelligence. He was trying to understand a weakness that had been implanted in him, the strange, gentle man who had almost overthrown the king. "So," he mused, after she had finished her heartbreaking tale, "this Thunder, he was a happy man. He was," Eira whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He was a fool," Roric declared, slamming his flagon on the table. "Happiness is a luxury for lesser men. A king has only his rage and his purpose." He stood and walked toward her, circling her like a shark. "You made me weak, healer. You filled my head with nonsense about gardens and sunsets. You almost made me forget my vow." He stopped in front of her, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. She could smell the ale on his breath, see the cold fire in his eyes. "But I remember now," he hissed. "I remember everything. And I will have my vengeance on Admiral Valerius. And this entire coast will burn as a message to him." She finally broke. "The man I saved would never do this," she said, the tears finally falling. "The man I love is not a monster." For a flicker of a second, she saw something in his eyes, a flash of pain, of conflict, the ghost of Thunder, screaming from behind the bars of the king's rage. But it was gone as quickly as it came. The mask of the executioner slammed back into place. "The man you love is dead," he said, his voice flat and empty. "I killed him this morning on the beach." He turned his back on her. "Take her back to her cottage. She is to be confined there. She has served her purpose." As Grim led her away, Eira looked back at the man who was two people at once. The king on his stolen throne, and the prisoner trapped inside him. She had healed his body, but in doing so, had helped him forget his soul. The story of a gentle man named Thunder had been a brief, beautiful tale, but now it seemed destined to be just a footnote in the bloody epic of Roric the Executioner. It's a tragic reminder of how our past can relentlessly hunt our present, a theme many of us grapple with in our own lives. And if you find yourself captivated by these struggles of identity and love, consider subscribing so you don't miss the conclusion to this heartbreaking saga. Eira's cottage, once a sanctuary of peace and love, became a gilded cage. Roric had ordered her confined, but it was a strange sort of imprisonment. He had 2 of his pirates stationed outside her door at all times, not, it seemed, to keep her in, but to keep the rest of the crew out. He brought her food himself, leaving it on her doorstep without a word. He was treating her like a fragile, valuable object, a relic from a life he was trying to understand and eradicate at the same time. For days, she remained locked in her solitude, drowning in grief. The man she loved was dead, and his killer wore his face, slept in his village, and haunted her every waking moment. Every footstep outside her door made her heart leap, half in terror, half in a desperate, foolish hope that Thunder would somehow reappear. But he never did. Only the cold, silent presence of the king remained. But Eira was a healer. Her nature was not to surrender to sickness, but to fight it. And she began to realize that Roric was a man afflicted with the deepest sickness of all, a poisoned soul. The gentle man she knew was not a lie. He was a truth that had been buried. And she, who had once healed his body, found a new, dangerous purpose forming in her heart. She would not mourn Thunder. She would fight for him. She began to test the boundaries of her prison. She started by speaking to the guards, 2 rough pirates named Finn and Cobb. At first, they ignored her, but she was persistent. She didn't plead or cry. She asked them about their homes, their families. She treated them not as monsters, but as men. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to talk. They told her stories of Captain Roric, of his strategic genius, his almost supernatural skill in battle. But they also spoke of his coldness, his obsessive, all-consuming quest for vengeance that often put them in needless danger. They followed him out of fear and to share the plunder, but they did not love him. No one did. Meanwhile, Roric was preparing for war. He was turning Port Mist into a fortress, forcing the villagers to build barricades and sharpen weapons. His ship, the Reaper, was being refitted, its cannons cleaned, its hull repaired. He was a whirlwind of focused, brutal energy. But at night, the cracks in his armor began to show. The nightmares returned, worse than ever. The entire village could sometimes hear his tormented shouts echoing from the tavern. He was a king haunted by the ghost of the gentle man he had murdered. He began to summon Eira again. He would have her brought to him in the late hours of the night, not to talk, but simply to be there. He would sit by the fire, sharpening his sword, and she would sit across the room, watching him. The silence was a battlefield between them. He was trying to prove to himself that she meant nothing, that he was immune to the peace she represented, and she was trying to reach the man trapped inside the king. He was weak, Roric said one night, breaking a long silence. He didn't need to say who he was. This Thunder, he would have gotten you killed. This world has no place for men like him. This world has no place for men like him because men like you burn it all to the ground. Eira shot back, her voice finding its strength. He wasn't weak. He was strong enough to be kind. A strength you've clearly forgotten. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He stood and walked a window, staring out at the dark sea. Kindness is a myth, a story told to children. The only truth in this world is power. The power to take what you want, and the power to destroy those who stand in your way. Your father taught me that. The mention of her father, the one piece of her life he knew nothing about, startled her. My father was a fisherman. He taught me how to heal. Roric laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. I was not speaking of your father, girl, he said, turning back to face her, his eyes burning with a cold fire. I was speaking of mine, or rather, the man who was supposed to be. My father was a king, a ruler of the Northern Isles, and his trusted advisor, a man of ambition and poison named Valerius, betrayed him. Valerius burned my home, slaughtered my family, and sold me into slavery on a pirate ship. I was 10 years old. That is the world I know, the world of betrayal. Admiral Valerius, your future husband, taught me my first and only lesson. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her arranged marriage, the powerful admiral her father had promised her to, the man she had never met. It was him, the ghost at the center of Roric's rage. Her world, which had already been shattered, was now being pulverized into dust. She was betrothed to the very man her love had sworn to kill. Valerius, she breathed, the name feeling like ash in her mouth. Roric saw the look of recognition on her face, the dawning horror. A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. "Ah," he said, "so you know of him, the great hero of the Empire." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "This changes things. You are no longer just a healer who got in my way. You are a weapon, his intended. Imagine his face when I send him your pretty head in a box." The threat was brutal, meant to break her, but it did the opposite. It ignited a fire in her. She was not just a pawn in his game. She was a queen in her own right. "You won't touch me," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "And who will stop me?" he sneered. "He will," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Thunder. He is still in there. And he would never let you harm me." Her words struck him like a physical blow. He recoiled as if burned. The ghost she had summoned was the one enemy he could not fight. He stared at her, the battle raging in his eyes. For a moment, she saw him again. The lost, confused man on the beach. But the moment passed. The king slammed the door shut. "Get her out of my sight," he roared to the guards. As she was dragged from the room, she knew she had found a crack in his armor. He was not one man who had replaced another. He was two men at war for the same soul. Roric, the king, was in command, but Thunder, the lover, was still alive, a prisoner in the dungeon of his own mind. She had healed his body, and now she had performed a far more dangerous kind of surgery. She had to heal his memory and set the right man free. But she knew that in doing so, she might just be signing her own death warrant, and the death warrant of the man she was sworn to marry. The war was no longer just on the seas. It was inside the heart of the Pirate King, and she was the only one who could choose the victor. The revelation that Eira was betrothed to his mortal enemy did not simplify things for Roric. It complicated them to an agonizing degree. She was no longer a symbol of a past weakness, but a living, breathing embodiment of his future vengeance. Killing her would be the ultimate act of retribution against Valerius. Keeping her alive was a constant, maddening reminder of the gentle man he was trying to exorcise from his soul. He found himself trapped in a paradox of his own making. He couldn't kill her, and he couldn't let her go. So he did the only thing a man torn in two could do. He made her his prisoner, but also his confidant. He stopped confining her to the cottage. Instead, he forced her to be at his side in the tavern's great room as he planned his war. He spread out maps of the coastline, charts of naval patrols, and forced her to look. He wanted to show her, in brutal detail, how he was going to dismantle the world of the man she was supposed to marry. It was a form of psychological torture, designed to break her loyalty to Valerius and prove the futility of her past life. But Eira was no longer playing his game. She was playing her own. She knew she couldn't fight his rage with rage. She had to fight it with memory. She had to become a living ghost, the ghost of the life they had shared. While he talked of cannon placements and ambush points, she would counter with a quiet memory. "This cove you plan to attack," she would say softly. "Thunder and I found the rarest blue seashells there. He collected them for me." Roric would flinch, his jaw tightening, and roughly change the subject. When he pointed to a forest on the map where he planned to source timber, she would reply, "That is where Thunder learned the names of the birds." He had a favorite, a small yellow finch. Each memory was a pinprick, a tiny needle of light stabbing into the suffocating darkness of his rage. He tried to ignore her, to drown her out with his talk of war, but her words were seeds, and they were finding fertile ground in the forgotten corners of his mind. The pirates watched these exchanges with bewildered fascination. Their captain, the fearsome executioner, was being held hostage by the quiet words of a village healer. Her greatest weapon, she discovered, was the village itself. Roric, in his arrogance, had kept the villagers alive as a workforce. Eira began to use them. She organized the women to cook for the pirates, but she instructed them to make the simple, hearty stews that Thunder had loved. She had the fishermen sing the sea shanties that Thunder had learned to hum. Every sight, every sound, every smell in Port Mist became a trigger, a small, persistent echo of the year of peace he had known. The entire village became a conspiracy of memory, a rebellion fought with bread and song. Roric felt it. He was a king in his castle, but the very walls were whispering a different man's name. He grew more volatile, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He drank more. He slept less. The ghost of Thunder was no longer just in his nightmares. It was in his soup, in the air he breathed. The breaking point came one evening. Roric, in a drunken fury, was berating old Silas for a perceived failure. He had the old man on his knees, his sword at his throat, ready to make an example of him. The pirates in the tavern fell silent, the familiar terror returning. "Please," Eira said, her voice cutting through the tension. She did not plead. She stated a fact. "Don't do this." Roric turned his glare on her. "Give me one reason why I should spare this useless old man." "Because he was your friend," she said simply. "He taught you how to read the tides. You laughed with him on the beach. You respected him. Thunder respected him." Roric roared, slamming his fist on the table. "Thunder is dead." "Is he?" Eira took a brave step forward, her eyes locked on his. "The man I see before me is terrified. Terrified of a memory. Terrified of a part of himself that knew how to be happy. You think killing this man will prove you are strong? It will only prove you are a coward, running from the only good thing you ever had." The entire tavern held its breath. She had not just challenged the king. She had judged him. He stared at her, his chest heaving, the sword trembling in his hand. The war in his eyes was a visible, violent storm. He was Roric, the avenger. He was Thunder, the lover. And for a heart-stopping moment, no one knew who would win. Then, with a guttural scream of pure anguish, he threw his sword. It clattered against the far wall. He did not look at Silas. He did not look at his crew. He looked only at Eira, his face a mask of torment. "Get out!" he whispered, the command a ragged, broken thing. "All of you, get out!" The pirates and Silas scrambled from the tavern, leaving the two of them alone in the firelight. Roric collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The king had finally broken. He was no longer a monster or a ghost. He was just a man, drowning in the wreckage of two lives. Eira approached him slowly, cautiously, as one would approach a wounded wolf. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not offer empty platitudes. She simply knelt beside his chair and, for the first time since his memory had returned, she placed her hand on his arm. He didn't flinch away. He didn't react at all, except for a shudder that ran through his entire body. "I am here," she whispered. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain that was older than his rage. "He is still there, isn't he?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "The man I was—" "He never left," she said. "He was just waiting." In that moment, the war was not over, but a truce had been called. He was not Roric, and he was not Thunder. He was both, a man with a past full of rage and a past full of love, and he could no longer deny either. He looked at Eira, the woman who had seen both sides of his soul, and had not run. The weapon he had intended to use against his enemy had become his only salvation. He knew his quest for vengeance would lead him to Valerius, but he now knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his path back to himself led only through her. The truce in the tavern was the dawn of a fragile new era in Port Mist. Roric did not abandon his plan for war, but their nature shifted. The cold, obsessive rage was replaced by a grim, reluctant duty. He was no longer a monster reveling in his own darkness. He was a man facing a destiny he could no longer escape. He still drilled his crew, still fortified the village, but the cruelty was gone. He was preparing for a battle, not a massacre. And in this new, quiet space he allowed Eira in. He did not reclaim the name Thunder. That man was a dream, an impossibility. But he was no longer solely Roric, the executioner. He was simply himself, a man forged by both the storm of his early life and the calm of the year he had spent with her. They would walk the beach at night, the place where she had found him, and for the first time, he would talk. He spoke not of his rage, but of his pain. He spoke of the family he had lost, of the boy he had been. And she, in turn, did not speak of the gentle man he had been, but of the good man she still saw within him. She was not trying to erase his past, but to help him integrate it, to prove that his scars did not have to define him. Their love was no longer the simple, idyllic thing it had been. It was something deeper, stronger, forged in fire and memory. It was a love that acknowledged the monster and embraced the man. But the world does not wait for broken men to heal. A scout ship, one of Roric's, returned with dire news. Admiral Valerius's fleet had been sighted, and it was not sailing for Port Mist. It was sailing towards the capital of the Northern Isles, Roric's ancestral home. Valerius was not just hunting a pirate. He was going to finish what he started 15 years ago. Erase the last vestige of Roric's bloodline from the face of the earth. And he was using a royal wedding, his own marriage to the daughter of the island's governor, as the perfect cover for his fleet's arrival. The name of the bride was not mentioned, but Eira felt a cold dread wash over her. The choice was no longer theoretical. It was here. Roric could stay in Port Mist, safe in his fortress, and let his past burn. Or he could sail into the heart of his enemy's power, not for vengeance, but to save the people his family had once sworn to protect. He stood before his crew, the two halves of his soul finally united. Admiral Valerius believes I am a pirate who seeks only gold and revenge, he said, his voice ringing with a new, clear authority. He is about to learn that I am something far more dangerous. I am a king, returning to claim his home. He looked at his men. I cannot order you to come with me. This is not a raid for plunder. It is a battle for a ghost, for a memory. But I will sail with the morning tide. Who is with me? To a man. The crew of the Reaper roared their approval. They were not just following a captain now. They were following a cause. As they prepared to sail, Roric turned to Eira. His face was grim. You cannot come, he said. It's a suicide mission. You once told me the man I loved was dead, Eira replied, her gaze unwavering. You were wrong. I am not letting him die a second time. She placed her hand on his cheek. My place is with you, whether that is in a garden or in the heart of a battle. The final confrontation was a masterpiece of strategy, a fusion of Roric the King and Thunder the Man. They did not sail into the harbor with cannons blazing. Instead, using the knowledge of the coastline that only he possessed, Roric slipped the Reaper into a hidden cove. Under the cover of the wedding celebrations, he and a small, elite team infiltrated the city. His goal was not to fight a fleet, but to cut the head off the snake. The climax came in the grand hall of the castle, during the wedding feast. Admiral Valerius stood to give a toast, his face smug with victory. At that moment, the great doors of the hall burst open. Roric stood there, no longer dressed as a pirate, but in the dark, regal colors of his lost house. He was not a pirate. He was a reckoning. The battle was swift and personal. While his men secured the hall, Roric faced Valerius. It was not a duel of fury, but of cold, precise justice. He disarmed the admiral, his blade at his throat. He looked into the eyes of the man who had destroyed his life, and he felt nothing, only a quiet, profound sense of closure. He did not kill Valerius. He simply exposed him, revealing his treachery to the assembled nobles. Justice, he had learned, was not about blood. It was about truth. As Valerius was dragged away in chains, a bride, veiled and silent, watched from a high table, Roric walked towards her. He had forgotten, in his quest, the final piece of Valerius's plan, the bride. He gently lifted her veil, and his world stopped. It was not Eira. It was a stranger, a noble woman, pale with fear. It was then that Roric understood Valerius's final, cruel joke. Eira had never been his betrothed. The story had been a lie, a rumor planted for her father to hear, a way to control her, to lure Roric into a trap. Eira had been a pawn, just as he had been. He ran from a hall, a new and true fear in his heart. He ran back to the harbor, to the hidden cove, and he found it empty. The Reaper was gone. In its place, tied to the dock, was a single longboat, and in it was Grim, his first mate, his head bowed. "Where is she?" Roric demanded, his voice cracking. "The fleet, Captain," Grim said, his voice thick with regret. "Valerius's fleet. They were not here for the wedding. It was a diversion. Their real target was the village. Port missed. They sailed an hour ago. She took the ship. She took the crew. She went to buy you time." The final shot is of Roric's face, a face of utter devastation, but also of dawning, blazing purpose. Eira, the healer, the lover, had learned his final lesson. She had become a queen in her own right. She had made a sacrifice, not for a memory, but for the man she loved. He looked out at the open sea, towards a distant smoke on the horizon. His war for vengeance was over, but his war for love, for the woman who had saved his soul, had just begun. He would cross the oceans, he would burn fleets, he would tear down the world to get her back. The gentle man named Thunder was gone forever. The ruthless executioner was dead. In their place stood a king, finally worthy of his name, sailing into a storm to save his queen.